So welcome to the official first night of the full stack module, even though we kind of really already started on Thursday. So we are going to pick up where we left off with the to-do app. We were able to get database queries returning. We're able to get our Postgres up and running. We're able to see everything in Beekeeper. Now comes the fun part of being able to do that right in the code, right? So second half of tonight, we're going to do the rest of our update and delete queries in addition to inserting into the database all within our code. And then we're going to get practice doing that all over again in our chat app. So the chat app that we did in React, we will move that over to full stack, get that saving in the database, just keep on getting practice with that. And then in the chat app, we're also going to introduce something called the ORM, the Object Relational Mapper, which is basically a way for us to interact with our SQL databases directly in our JavaScript without having to write a line of SQL. So why do we teach you SQL in the first place? Well, as a full stack developer, there are kind of three things you need to be able to do, right? Front end, whether that's in web or mobile, back end, and that can be in almost any programming language. We happen to be doing it in Node.js and JavaScript. And then the database itself, where you're either going to have a relational database that is probably using SQL, or you're going to have a non-relational database like Mongo, where you still need to write queries to interact with it, but the queries are written in usually using JavaScript, and the data that's getting returned is more like an object. So anyway, we will be interacting with Sequelize, which is an object relational mapper. We'll get into more of that the second half of this week. With all of that said, does anyone have any lingering questions? Any questions about your ERDs? I do believe, I did not check in the past couple hours, everyone except one person. Nope, I got you feedback on everyone. So if you have submitted your ERD, you should have feedback on it. One person did submit a perfect ERD that needed no feedback. If you have any questions on ERDs, I definitely don't expect yours to be perfect on the first go around. I tried to give feedback on them, but if you are reading the feedback and you're like, no freaking clue what this means, let me know. And I've also provided feedback directly in Canvas on some of the ERDs, and then on other ones, I uploaded it to a comment. So if you don't see feedback, let me know and I can help you find it. Okay. Joe said in the chat, I definitely need more practice. My weakest point is linking the tables, I guess the relational part. Yeah, so database design is not something that I expect you guys to know in a 3-hour class, right? And that's why we do this assignment, so that I can get you feedback on that. So what you kind of want to start thinking about, and a good test is, what kind of relationship is this between the tables, right? Is this a one-to-one, meaning that for every patient, there will be exactly one coordinator assigned to them? Or is this a one-to-many relationship? In other words, this one patient could have multiple service coordinators assigned to them. Or is this a many-to-many relationship where many patients could have many service coordinators? And a lot of that will determine where you put that field or that ID, right? Because if the service coordinator can have many patients associated with them, we can't store the patient ID in the coordinators table, because that breaks the rule of storing multiple values in one field. So if it's the other way around, and we say, oh, well, there's every one patient only has one service coordinator, then it becomes a little bit easier to say, oh, that coordinator ID should be in the patients table, not in the coordinators table. So it's something that takes practice, and there are some rules with database design. That's why I threw that article out there as kind of a refresher. So there are some times that I'm reviewing your ERDs and I can say, no, this is definitively wrong, and I can point to the rule in that article or in a SQL design textbook and say, this is why we're not allowed to do that. Or there are other times where I'm like, well, this is fine. I just wouldn't do it this way. I would do it this way instead. And that's why I like to open up the feedback, because some of my feedback on your assignments, you will know the project better than I do, right? You know the one-to-many relationships, or you know the types of data that you're storing. So one thing that I have found to be really, really helpful is after you do your ERD, go into Google Sheets or Excel and build out those tables with just dummy data, because that dummy data will be really helpful for you down the road, once you get your full stack connected, to make sure that there's something in the database and that it's showing up properly. But that setting up that dummy data will also give you a better idea of the relationships, right? Because you may get into a spot where you go, oh, I stored patient ID on the service coordinator table, and now I just realized that there's no way for me to put multiple patients assigned to that one service coordinator without putting a comma or emulating a list somehow. So it is a really good idea, once you submit your ERDs, and you get feedback on them, to go in Google Sheets, create a little dummy table, or dummy tables, and see if you can load in all of your data. Because that will point to, hey, how finished is your design? How ready is it to go into full stack? And some of your projects are simpler than others, right? But they will be more advanced in other places. So some people may have only 3 or 4 tables in their database and only 1 or 2 relations. That is okay. The more advanced or more complex projects will have 10 or more tables. The database, when I started, at my company, we started with 15. We're up to 40 at this point. So our diagram is obviously a lot more complex, but we try and keep that up to date, because it's much easier to understand the data we're storing and the relations of that data from a diagram than it is to just throw all of those tables at you and go, oh, go figure this out, right? So that's why those ERDs are important. Okay, any other questions lingering about assignments, about ERDs, about the to-do code that we did on Thursday? Anything you guys would like to bring up? Okay, we're going to jump right on into our to-do code from Thursday. I'm gonna pop open my code. I'm gonna go into my week 17. I'm gonna open my day 4. And now we've got 2 things we got to deal with here. Our to-do front end has a node modules in it. So I'm gonna go ahead and delete that one. And then I'm gonna go up to my back end and delete my node modules from my back end as well. And just as a reminder, we wouldn't do this for every project when we got started the next day. But we do this so that we can do day over day progress. Oh, the full stack class from Thursday isn't posted on YouTube. Give me 1 second to check that, because I didn't get an email that it failed to post. It is not on YouTube for sure. Okay. Thank you for that reminder. I will get that uploaded probably during the break.
Did we just need Beekeeper Studio if we didn't I didn't catch the last half of Thursday's class?
Beekeeper Studio and Postgres app.
Okay.
The little
Wasn't there some
elephant.
was there something weird that I need to do with Postgres? I remember there's something weird I had to do for one of them. It's not like the most I had to go into a specific menu for one of the downloads.
Beekeeper, you need to get the community edition. Um, and if you scroll up in the Zoom chat, oh, maybe not. I thought I put it in the Zoom chat. I did. If you scroll up to August 15th at 7:30, I have the link to Beekeeper and the Postgres app there.
Wait a minute. What? You mean in the chat in Zoom currently?
Yeah, here, I'll just throw it in there again.
Didn't realize I could go back that far. All I can see is this current meetings.
Oh, maybe I can just see it because I'm signed in. Those I just dropped the two links in for anyone who missed Thursday's class and needs to do that setup.
All right, thank you.
Yep. Okay, so in week 17, day 4, I've gone into both my front end and my back end and deleted the node modules in both of them. I'm gonna go copy my day 4, create my week 18, paste in my day 4, and rename it to day 1. Now that I've got my day 1, we want to open these separately. And a lot of developers will work with the front end and back end open in the same window. But we just had a graduate actually shoot himself in the foot because he was working all in one window and a file auto imported from his back end into his front end code. And his front end code just refused to start up because it saw an import that was crossing a boundary that shouldn't have been there. So I really recommend opening your backend code in one VS Code window and your front end code in the other, and have two completely separate windows for them. Not everyone does that. It is not an absolute requirement. It's just what I personally recommend. Okay, I'm going to throw live shares in for the front end and the back end. I am going to pop open my integrated terminal, and for both of these, I need to run the command npm install. And it is okay to have both installs running at the same time. So both in my front end and back end, I'm going to npm install. Once they are done, this is week 18, day 1. Once those installs are done, you can go ahead and run the npm start command. Good idea to run the start command on your back end first, because your front end may error out as it starts up if it can't communicate to the back end. So you should see server listening on 3001 in your back end terminal, and in your front end terminal, once that starts up, you should not only see running on 3000, but you should also see your React app pop up with what was ever in the database. If anyone is having trouble, make sure your Postgres is running in the background. So you will probably have a little elephant up in the top of your menu bar. If you don't, you can command space, open up the Postgres app, and you may have to hit the start button on that. Don't worry about the version number, but it should say running at the top. If your Postgres is not running, you need to go catch it. Haha, bad joke. But you will get an error in your backend if your database is not running. Make sure that it is. Again, final result that we should see here is connect my DB to backend, or whatever task that we inserted into the database is what should be showing up here. Does anyone not have their database connected running? Does anyone have an error message in either their front end or back end? Where are we at?
Since I didn't catch the last half of Thursday's class, would you recommend me just sit and watch for tonight until I can get caught up with setting everything up?
Probably. The other option that you have is you could grab my code off of GitHub. and use that. And then you just have to run the npm install after you get the package.json. But there are, we definitely did a lot of setup steps, so it may be better just to sit and watch.
Alrighty.
Oh, that's weird. The video uploaded, but it got set to private for some reason. Very odd. Um, Let me save. What? Okay. Um, Last Thursday's video is now live on YouTube. Sorry about the delay there. I have no idea why that happened. Okay. We are going to dive into our task list. So, as a reminder where we left off, in our source, in our app.js, we set up state. Anytime that we've got data coming from the database that we want to show to the user, or anytime we have data that is interacted with the user, we store it in state. We said, hey, when this component first loads, that's the use effect with the empty dependencies array, go in and fetch to 3001 tasks. You will notice here that we jump from 10 to 14. Why is that? Because over in the back end, we did a lot of work to set up 3 npm packages. Express, which is the framework that we use on top of Node.js to make APIs. CORS, cross-origin resource sharing, which is telling our API we do want to allow different domains to be able to access our API, and PG, Postgres. We set up Express. We tell Express our Express server to allow CORS. We set up Postgres by setting up a database client and telling it what database to connect to. We tell it to actually go through and do that connection. Then we set up 2 different endpoints. The first endpoint that we set up was just our very first, hey, let's test this. Let's make sure the server is running. Let's send some data back. Then we did a server.get tasks. That is the first time that we've run a query in our backend, right? So the database is selecting all the columns in the to-dos table, grabbing that data. We extract out just the rows from the result of that query, and we send it back to the front end. And then the last thing we do is we tell our server, hey, listen for requests going to the port 3001. Any request that comes in from 3001, we want to send a response to. So we send the data back from the database. The data gets parsed out, gets set into state. The state is used up here. The state then comes down into this map. Why do we need a map? Well, we need to loop over all of the tasks. We can't just show all of the tasks as like an array or a JSON object or anything like that. So we loop over each individual task and we say, hey, show each of the tasks' name as an LI, as a list item. Does anyone have questions on that review? Okay. Well, being able to see the tasks in the database is great, but I'd also like to be able to add a task to the database. So whenever we're working through these tasks, we want to break this down because this could get overwhelming, just the simple task of I need to be able to add something new to my list. So we are going to break this down into, we got to make an input. We've got to be able to get the text from that input, which is going to be state. We need to handle when that input is submitted, which will be in the form. We need to send that input to the database. we need to then get the results that are in the database and show them now updated. So let's walk through those steps. First thing I said is we need an input. So I'm going to throw um we're going to say form. We're not doing anything pretty here, right? Of course, this is in React. We could get fancy, but we won't for this. We're going to do an input type text and a button that says add item. And we will do a type of submit on this. I always like doing a button instead of a like an on click. I like doing the submit because then the enter button will work on the form compared to if you did an on click directly on the button, the enter wouldn't work. Okay, so I'm gonna just take a quick peek at that, make sure that that looks somewhat okay. You know what? Let's just throw in a little margin all around the page of 25 pixels, so it's not right up on the top. Okay, text is in, add item button. That's one step off the list. Two, we need to be able to know what the user typed in. I'll give you guys a second. Okay, we got our input set up. Now we got to know what they've typed into that. Now, I could keep this as an uncontrolled input, but I know that when this form gets submitted, I'm going to want to be able to clear out the input text, right? I'm not taking them to another page. I want to say that item was added. Let's make it so you can type another item in. Because of that, I'm going to make this a controlled input in my React. So up in the top, it's a good idea to group all of our states together. So I'm going to say new item text and set new item text is equal to a use state that will start out as empty. Inputs in HTML and React don't like uh, don't like being null, so we make them an empty string. Then we come down to our input type text, and we are going to add a value on that of new item text. And we are going to say on change of that input, grab the event and set the new item text to the event target value. So we've got our use state up here. So the variables are all linked up. And we've got our value and our on change down here. We come over, I type in ABC. I just want to make sure that things are typing correctly. If things are not typing in correctly, we've got a problem. Okay. Everyone good? Give you guys one more minute there. The use state, the value, and the on change are what we have used to make this a controlled input. Anyone need help? Okay. So we are going to move on to, well, now what happens when this form is submitted? So we'll say on submit, add new task. We will define that up here. Const add new task is going to grab the event, and we will event prevent default to prevent the page from being reloaded. And now we're ready to rock and roll. So to test to make sure all of this is working, I'm going to console log out my new item text. I save, I pop open the console, I make sure I have something typed into the input, I click add item, and I should get ABC coming out of the bottom. Now that I've got that set up, what do you guys think the next step is? I see a lot of head turning, so I'm going to pause here, let you guys catch up. If anyone needs help, it is totally fine to ask for help or just say one more minute. End goal here is that you can type something in the text field, click the button, and see it pop up in your console. Okay. We've got the item coming out here. We now need to send that information to the backend. So we've kind of already done that with our fetch. We've said, hey, go to the backend, get the new tasks. What we haven't done is done that in reverse and said, hey, we're sending new information to the backend. So I'm going to come down in here and say, well, I'm still going to get a response from the backend. I still need to await. And what do we know about await? Whenever we use the await keyword, we need to mark this function as async. So whenever you get an error, unexpected keyword await, immediately that should go off in your head of, oh, I don't even need to debug that. All I need to do is add the word async to whatever function I'm calling the await in. Okay, now what am I awaiting? I'm going to await a fetch, and it's still going to go to localhost, and it's still going to be 3001 because we know that's our back end. 3000 is our front end. And you know what? It can even still go to the tasks. But this time, I don't want to send a method in of get. I want to use a different type of method. So if I give fetch an object here, I get access to all the different details that I can do with fetch. So I'm going to set the method to post. I am then going to add a body. That body is going to be the new item text. I save that. I come over here. I hit the add item button and it tells me 404 not found. What do you mean you didn't find it? I'm looking at it. It says it's listening on 3001. Well, we told the front end to send the data as a post with the body as the text. But what we didn't do is tell the back end, hey, you're going to get a post request to the server. That post request is going to go to the tasks URL. It will still be async because almost every database we work with will be asynchronous. And we are going to get the request and the response. Every time you have an endpoint, you should always send something back, even if there's nothing in whatever you're sending back. You just need to send something. So I always like to put as a placeholder here res.send. That's usually the last thing that we do in an endpoint, but it's really easy to accidentally forget that. And then the browser gets cranky with you that it's sending out requests and not getting any responses. So good idea. Don't know what we're sending back yet, but we got to send something. So let's just res.send to make sure all of this is working, because now we're seeing all of these little steps can really add up, right? So all I'm going to do is add in a console log post request received. And I'm going to log out my request.body. So I save that. I come over here. I click add item. Now I don't get a 404 not found. That's left over. But if I look in my backend, I do have post request received, but I have this undefined. Like, well, that's less than ideal. We'll fix that in a second. But if you click your button in your front end, you should be getting the post request received in your backend terminal. Don't mix up your terminals. Console is different than the backend terminal, which is different than the front end terminal that is running your React server. Anyone have questions so far or not have their code running? Okay, let's go back to the front end. This is unfortunately a somewhat complicated solve to get the body working. What we did here is we just threw in the new item text. And if we go take a look in our network console, we can actually see the tasks 200 showing up in Chrome. And if we pop that open, you can see the under the payload tab, it says request payload is ABC. So we know we're sending that into Express, but we've interacted with a couple different APIs, and we know that the data type can be different for how we both send the data in and get the data back. What data format do we primarily use to send and receive information from an API?
JSON.
JSON. You would think, Joe, it's an object, but it's actually technically a string, which we're going to run into in a second, right? So JSON is what we need to use. This annoys me every time I do it because it's like 19 different steps and it should just be one flag that you can set. But alas, here we are. Yay, JavaScript. Gotta love it. We got to do two things in our front end call. We have to set some headers here. And the headers are going to be a content type of JSON. We have to put it in quotes because it has a dash in it. That will tell the server, hey, the content that I am sending in is in fact JSON. Now, in order to actually send that object over the internet, we need to convert whatever we're sending into a string. So what we're going to do is we are going to JSON.stringify, and we are going to send in the let's call it new item from the new item text in our state. So two things we got to do. We got to say, hey, the data that we're sending in the body is specifically marked as, oh, and you know what? I think that's the wrong value. Let me double check that. I think it's application JSON. Come to think of it. Yes, it is. Sorry, this should not just be JSON. It should be application slash JSON. My bad. Two things we do in the headers so that it knows in the request, we tell our server, hey, what I'm sending in is JSON. Second thing that we do is in the body, we need to convert whatever we're sending in into actual JavaScript object notation. So we stringify that here. Now that we've done all of that work, we can switch back over to our backend, and we've got to tell our backend server, hey, go check the headers to see if JSON is set in there. If it is set to application JSON, automatically parse that JSON out for us and throw it into the body object. So we don't actually explicitly say JSON.parse here. What we're able to do is tell Express, hey, whenever the headers are set to application JSON, just go ahead and do that parsing out for us. So the way that we do that is up where we did this server.use cores, we're also going to do that for for JSON. So we're going to say server.use express.json. Now that should fill the body for us. So I'm going to go ahead and save that. My server's going to reboot in the background because node mon is watching it. I'm going to go back to my front end. I'm going to hit the add item button. And in my back end, I should see new item and whatever I typed in. If you are able to do that, congratulations. That is the most complicated part of everything that we are going to do tonight. There are 19 freaking steps here, and I know that it's easy to get lost in any one of them. So if you got to this point, pat yourself on the back, read through what we just added, see if you have any questions. If you don't have what we just did, feel free to debug for a minute and then ask a question if you need help. So add in the headers, we stringify whatever we're sending in. We then tell Express to use JSON. That gives us access to our rec body right here. Everyone good? Okay. Now I want to refresh myself because I'm like, all right, I've got the data in my backend. My backend I know can talk to the database. I don't remember what my database looks like. So I'm going to pop open Beekeeper Studio. If you were still connected from Thursday's class, that's totally fine. If you're not, hopefully you remembered to save your connection. So it should show up under saved, or if you are on this screen, that's totally fine. In the top left, my default database is Hack Upstate. So I'm going to click on that and go down to do. And then if I pop open my to-dos table, I'm able to see the three things that set into my to-dos. The ID, which should be auto-generated, the name of the task that I'm putting in, and whether or not that task is completed. So that helps me write the insert statement that I am going to do. Now, there is something called SQL injection that can happen here. This is not the most secure way of adding information into your database because it has the potential of letting someone insecurely run a SQL command without your permission. So this is, I'm throwing that out there because someone somewhere watching this video will go, "Oh, I can't believe they're teaching that insecure method." We will be fixing SQL injection with SQLize that we'll learn in the second half of the week. But for now, for the sake of understanding the basic flow of database front end, back end, all of that, we're going to use a method that could potentially be used as a vulnerability if you were to deploy this out onto the public internet. With all of that said, let's go ahead and do our insert statement. So I'm going to come down between my res.send and my console.log, and I'm going to await a DB query. And the DB query I want to do is I want to insert into, and my table is called to-dos. And the columns that I want to insert into are the name and completed columns. The values that I want to insert, well, I'll take care of the name in a second, but the task isn't completed by default, right? When I make a new task, it won't be completed when I add it. Ooh, excuse me, when I add it to the list. So I'm going to say false. But I do need to add in the task information. So make sure you have backticks here because I'm using a template literal. So if you have single quotes or double quotes, go ahead and change those out to backticks. I'm going to do single quotes here because that's what we insert the item text into in our SQL query. And then I'm going to do $ curly braces and say rec.body.new item. That is syntax hell. I completely understand that. Oh, and I need a semicolon at the end. So take your time on those. Backticks are absolutely required for this because we're using the $ curly brace. You want to make sure that your opening and closing parentheses are at the right spot. You need 2 sets of them. You need single quotes here because SQL is very finicky and very picky about single versus double versus backticks. So single quotes there, and then our $ curly braces. So we're taking whatever the new item is that they typed in and throwing that in there. Okay, if I save that, I go back to my front end, I click the add item button, and it doesn't look like much has happened. ABC logged out again. My post request was received with my new item ABC, but if my database query is running properly, I should be able to go over to Beekeeper, double click on my to-dos table, and see my ABC has now been inserted. Now, if this is feeling excruciatingly slow to you, it is because when you are doing these full stack flows for the first time, you will want to test at every single step of the process because it is so easy for one of these steps to go wrong, and then you have to trace through every individual one. It is much easier when you are getting started to test at every step of the process. So you can either double click on the to-dos table to reopen it, or if you already have it open, it's not like a live updating thing. So you may have to hit the refresh button in the bottom right to make sure that whatever you typed in as your task in the front end is now showing up here. If you have a null here, or you have an error in your terminal, now is the time to ask for help. Well, there are 3 refresh buttons that I know of currently. The refresh up here is to refresh all the databases that are stored on the server. The refresh button by entities that only shows up if you hover there is going to refresh the list of tables that is in this database. And then the refresh button down here is only refreshing the data for this particular table or view that we're in. And the reason why there are so many of them is because it runs a separate command to refresh each one of them, which is why there's not a universal refresh button. Austin, what's up?
I'm mine saying the app crashed and I'm getting like prettiers mad at me.
Okay, go ahead and share your screen. You are missing the closing curly brace after the word item on 25.
Here?
Yep, closing curly there.
Oh, yeah.
And then the other problem is you have a DB colon query instead of a DB period query.
Oh,
And if you save, that should
oh,
make, yep. So prettier's happy, server's happy. Go ahead and submit your form on the front end. And then go over to Beekeeper and use the bottom right refresh or open up the to-dos table.
sweet. Yep, it's in there.
Cool, nice work. Anyone else need help?
Yes, I do. Okay, so I mistakenly deleted my code apparently, and I like just got everything back.
Okay,
And I did follow along with the edits, but I don't know. I think I'm missing some sort of section somewhere. Hold on, I'll share my screen.
go for it.
Clean it up. Oh yeah, and I know that we usually open the front end and the back end on like 2 different
Windows?
folder windows. But when I restored it and like copied and pasted, it popped up in the same folder. Is that okay?
It is. I don't personally like doing that because VS Code can get confused about imports. And it will sometimes, if you're like working in your front end code, it will sometimes accidentally import something from your back end folder into your front end folder.
Mm.
So I personally like having them separated out, but there are a lot of developers who do like having their front end and back end in the same window. So I can't like I can't be like, don't do that. That's the end of the world. It won't definitely cause problems, but it has the potential to.
Okay, and then I'm gonna have to like restart my
Yes, once you close out of that back one.
okay. Yeah, which one? Oh yeah, so this is the back end.
Yep.
I'm gonna keep the front end. Okay. So NPM start.
So, yep, npm start there. And
Oh, no.
you already have a back end running.
Oh, it's in here.
Yeah. So, I'm gonna just request remote. And then it's hiding in this terminal over here. So Control C to stop. And then delete that terminal entirely. And then if we go over here, Control C and restart, everything's running. So that's good. Your insert looks good. So go ahead and on your front end in the browser, type something in and hit the oh,
It's this
it should
one.
just be 3000, not 3001.
Oh,
Um okay, there we go.
it's-
So go ahead and type something in. Hit add item. Oh, okay, failed to fetch. And if we take a look over here, it's going to tell you that it is confused by this.
Oh, okay.
And I don't think it needs a semicolon, but it's good practice for a sequel. So we save, we come over, we refresh, we type something in, we hit add item, it saw that, and if we pop open Beekeeper and change your database to to-do and go into public and to-dos, something is there.
Thank you. I was following on without testing, so I don't know if it was actually working or not. I'm happy that it was.
You want to make my skin crawl? Submit a assignment in Canvas that is just not valid JavaScript, because my brain will be like, what do you mean you did the homework assignment without testing it? Like, always, always, always run your code before you turn it in. And if you submit your code and you're like, I have no idea what's causing this error, I tried my best, like, that's okay. But if you're like, I think this should work, like, we gave you $1,000 computer. Use it. Run your code.
Thank
Okay.
you.
Yeah, of course. Anyone else need help? Yeah, I mean, I've been in that scenario where like I'm so roadblocked that I just have to like write the code and just hope that it works, but it's very rarely a good idea to brute force anything, let alone code, if it's not running.
I got code grid. It's all right. It's different though, because some of the assignments will be like this is what where the output is, but it's not actually what the output should be.
All right. So feeling pretty good. Got my insert running. I can see the data in the database. I'm looking at my browser and I'm like, yo, I just added ABC. Why isn't it there? Well, if I refresh the page, ABC is now there. That's terrible user experience to have the person have to refresh the page in order to see the data that was just added. Believe it or not, I've worked in plenty of user interfaces that do make you do that. Drives me nuts. Bad thing to do. So what we could do is take this new item text and just update our task list to include that. But that's not the best way to do it, because new items could have been added to the database by someone else in another tab, or the database may have looked at that task list and gone, oh, we need to modify that a little bit. We may need to store some additional information about it. We may remove some quotes in there, right? Could get a little funky. So instead, what the better approach to do here is in our backend, once we do the query, we're going to run another query to get the database result to do the select, and then we are going to send back the result of that. So I copied and pasted line 32 and 36 from my code, but if you want to rewrite it out, that's fine. All we're doing is another select. Meet with my semicolons. We're doing another select from the database to get all of the to-dos once they were inserted, and then go ahead and send back those tasks. Once we do that, we are done with the post. Do make sure you only have one res.send. Express gets really cranky with you if you send back 2 responses for 1 request. Confuses the crap out of it. So make sure you only have one res.send, and make sure that res.send is the one that is sending back all of the tasks. One res.send per endpoint. So your res.send up here should still be in here, but in the post, make sure you only have one res.send. Reach through the virtual Zoom machine and slap you silly if you have multiple res.sends still left in your post request. Okay, Once you get the database result and the res.send in, we got to switch back to the front end and work with it. So we've got to parse the response. We need to then set our tasks to the data.tasks. Why .tasks? Because that's what we're sending back right here. So we grab our tasks, we extract them out, and we set them after we add them. The last thing we need to do is set our new item text to empty. That will clear out our form field so that we could type in something else if we needed to. The beauty of React, we don't need to do anything different in our tasks.map. And this is where we start to see really the power of React and not having to iterate over the objects to create the list item, to update the DOM, all of that. All we need to do is take the new data and set it into our state. React will then magically re-render the state down here to show the new item that got added. So now I come over here and say my third item, hit the enter button, and not only does my third item show up, we have completed the create and read loops of our database and can see my third item is now in the database. That's pretty monumental. We still have to do update and delete. We're going to do those next. But take a minute, make sure this is all soaking in, because this is really the first time you can say, I'm a full stack developer. You are at this point building out an entire front end, building out your own API, and interacting with the database to complete the entire loop. Front end to back end to database data back to the back end sends the information to the front end. We have gone full circle at this point. Everyone good? Before I forget, let's go do attendance. The secret word for tonight is new item. That is how uncreative I am. And I just realized, oh, good. All right, once you have attendance done, again, secret word is new item. Once you have that done, we are going to move on to our update and delete queries. So in order to update the task, we are going to start by just being able to mark that task as completed. We don't want to delete the task because at the end of the day, there's an actual dopamine release from crossing an item off the list, right? So that's what we want to do. We want to be able to update a specific item in our database to set this completed to true, but then we also need to update it in our user interface to say, hey, if it is completed, display that task a little differently. Live share links are headed your way, Michael. Okay, So let's work on that. I am going to head to my UL, my list item, and I'm going to add a little button. Again, we're not going for pretty here. I would not make a user interface like this that's going out to the public. But for now, this is probably fine to do. So I'm going to, you know what? Maybe I'll do it as a checkbox instead of a button. Oh, well, that's great. My reference code doesn't even have that feature added. Okay. Let's do it as a input type equals checkbox. And you know what I'm gonna do? I'm gonna take out, now I'll just leave it like that. Not super pretty, but for now it will work. And what I'm going to do is I am going to say this is checked when the task is marked as complete. Now, none of my tasks are marked as complete in here. So let's just complete one to make sure it works. So I'm going to double click on my completed in Beekeeper and change it to true. So in Beekeeper, just pick any one of them, set it to true, and then down in the bottom right, you have to hit the apply button. So the edits you're making are not happening in real time. If you actually look in here, you can see there's a thing that says copy to SQL. And if you click on that, it will show you what it's going to do. It's going to update the to-dos table. It's going to set completed equal to true where the ID is equal to 2. Okay, that's pretty cool. But if I close this query out, and I'm back in my to-dos table, all I need to do is hit the apply button. You'll see it turns to green for a second and then back. What that just did is ran the actual query. So if you make a change and don't hit the apply button, it has not actually made that change yet. So I hit apply on that. I come over here, I refresh, and my item does not show as checked. And this is what happens when you don't follow reference code before class. Let's see, is it value? No. Input type checkbox. Ah. Forgot the D. Never forget the D. This should be checked. And it is task.completed, not complete, because our column name in Beekeeper is completed. So it should be checked equals task.completed. If the item is completed, now you will see it shows up checked in the user interface when you refresh it. We haven't done any update queries yet. All we've done is we've added in our input type checkbox, and we've said, hey, it should be checked if the task was marked as completed. And you do have to refresh over in the browser to make sure that you have your one item showing up as checked.
Mine's ain't checking when I'm clicking on the box.
It won't, when you click on the box, it will only show your current item. If you've updated it in the database, it will show that it is checked there. But we haven't made it so when you check it, it marks it as checked in the database. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
That's the next step we're gonna do. Okay. Anyone not have at least one of their items showing off as checked? Again, if you are in your interface right now, if you click on the checkbox, it won't do anything yet. That is normal. What we should be able to do is go to Beekeeper, change one of these values to true, hit the apply button, then go back into our interface and hit refresh. If that item shows up as checked, then we are good to go. Okay. Now let's make it so when you click on it, it will mark it as completed. So I'm going to come in here and I'm going to say on change, get the event, and do something about it. And because this is not a form submission, we don't need to do the event prevent default here. We only do event prevent default on a form submission. But on change of the input, we need to do what? We need to go back to the database and say, yo, database, set this item to checked or unchecked. Well, the way we do that is we are going to say, hey, we're still going to get a response. We are going to await, and because we're awaiting, we got to make the on change async, and we're going to do a fetch to HTTP localhost 3001. We are going to send it to tasks, and then we are going to do something a little different. I'm going to put those in backticks, that URL in backticks, and I am going to send that to include the task.id. And we are also going to include the event target value. And we will specify that that fetch is going to use a method of patch. Little funky here. Instead of using a body, which we could do, we are going to use URL parameters instead. We've seen URL parameters in React routes before, where we put the colon and the name of it, and then we're able to extract that information out of the URL. We're going to do the same thing, but this time over on our backend. So we are, once we have this in the front end, we can't really test it yet because we haven't told the back end about it. So we're going to go back over to the back end. We're going to make our second to last query. We're going to say server.patch. It's going to go into tasks, but this time the path is going to include the ID and whether or not the task is completed. It is still going to be an async request. And we are going to console log out the rec.params. So this time, it's not just the body that we're accessing, it's the parameters in the URL. So we're going to say rec.params.id and rec.params.completed. And a reminder, we always need to res.send something back, even if it's empty. We just got to say, here's the data. I will pause after this, but to test, go to your browser, check off a box, and hit 404s. Event target checked. Okay. One minor correction. Instead of event target value here, it should be event target checked. So in your front end, make sure it is event target.checked. If that is correct, save your backend, and you should, after you hit a checkbox, the checkbox won't update on the front end yet, but it should log out the ID and whether or not the box was checked. In this case, it should be true. So I'm going to pause there, let you guys catch up. But if you check off either of the boxes that are unchecked, it won't check it yet. But in the database or in the terminal in the backend, it should log out the ID that you were checking and whether or not it was checked. And that was a lot of little code, so I'm going to do a code status poll.
Can you say the back end code one more time?
Just to review it. Yeah, so we're going to do a patch request that lines up with the patch here. In this URL, we specified 2 different parameters that are included in the URL. So that's what this colon is doing. It's saying, hey, don't look for the words ID in the route, just look for some value sent in its path. So the ID here lines up with this ID that we're passing in here. And this thing that we're calling completed here lines up with whatever is going in right here. So those are called route params. We access them instead of going into the request.body, we go into the rec.params instead. And those params, this ID is lining up with this ID, this completed is lining up with that completed. So when we console log those out, we get 3 and true. Well, why? Because I checked off this one, which happened to be the 3rd item, the ID number 3, and then it was set to true because we checked it off. So in your backend terminal, you should see the ID that you clicked on and the fact that it was set to true. Oh, and in the front end, if you're not seeing true, if you're getting undefined, in the front end, make sure it is event.target.checked, not event target value. I got that one wrong.
I need help. I did something wrong. I can't identify it.
Go for it. Oh, and I just saw the messages in chat. I will catch up on those. ID completed, params, and your server.patch is inside your server.post. It should be outside of it. So take, 35 through 37 and move that out to below 236. Yeah. Oh, you did backticks there. Take those out and then paste. And then you are going to need a closing curly between 38 and 39. Now 39 and 40. So after 39, do an enter. And then do closing curly, closing parenthesis. And save. And you're back online. You've been muted this whole time, so sorry if I've been talking on top of you.
So I gotta go back to my browser. What happened to my localhost? It's 3,000. It's 300 or 3,000.
3,000. And then check one of them. And then in your terminal, you have 3 and true, so you're caught up.
But my box doesn't go in.
Not
Is
yet.
it still not supposed to do it yet? Okay. All right. Thank you.
Come on, you
I was
thought full stack was going to be easy? Get out of here.
I was debugging my front end while you were talking about the back end. So I was like, oh no, I messed up. But thank you.
So yes, Austin, only the terminal should be showing the ID that you clicked on and true. We haven't made the update in the database. We haven't made it in the front end yet. We haven't done any of that. All of this work just to tell the front end what to check off. Or the front end is telling the back end. For larger projects, would it be better to store everything in state and then patch at some interval all at once? I know that we would create potential gaps or openings for data loss if your browser closes. Yes. So because REST APIs are they go out, they get the data, they pull the data back, they store it in state, and then the only time that they will retrieve additional data is if you refresh the page, you set it up at an interval to pull that data in, or you hit the save button and it pulls the new data in when you hit the save button. It is generally recommended. I mean, the easiest thing to do is have that save button, right? Where a modal opens or they're working with form fields and then it doesn't go in until the user hits the save button. I have in my web apps gotten in the habit of doing on blur saves instead. So every time that they leave a text field, it is sending that data to the database and updating that one specific field. But it depends on your infrastructure and how many saves you're doing, because that can get really intensive on the database. Yes, it is a better UX. And what I do is I set up a custom input basically so that whenever they click outside of that input or tab to another one, the right hand of the input shows a little spinner that it is saving. When the save is complete, it shows a little green check mark. And then after 5 seconds, the green check mark goes away. So that's the approach I like to do, an on blur save, but that is certainly getting into full stack wizardry compared to the approach we're doing, which is a on form submit, which would be like a save button.
Okay, yeah, I was kind of wondering because sometimes I'll get into the weeds about like what's the most efficient way to write this. And like, is this more of like a semantics kind of issue where it'll save you like a nanosecond here or there, but like how intensive are those requests to the server? And I guess it depends on how like if there's many around the country or region or whatever. But
this is pretty light because we're doing an update and we're doing an update on a specific database ID. So if we had to say go find this result in the database based off of this field combined with this field and any of these values, that could be more intensive. But because we're doing an update on one specific table with one specific ID, it's safe to update as many of those fields as you would like. Okay. Now let's make it work. So we've done all of this work and our stupid checkboxes still aren't. Oh, Terry, you need help?
So the only thing that's supposed to be like displaying is the console in the browser, like the button still doesn't work, right?
Correct. Yes.
Okay. Yeah.
That's
okay.
what we're doing right now. So we've done all of this work to just tell the backend server ID3 was the checkbox that was clicked on, and we want to set that task as completed. So that's what we're going to do now. We are going to dive into our patch requests, and we are going to issue a DB query that says update the to-dos table. Oh, that should be in a template literal. My bad. Update to-dos. And we are going to set completed equal to whatever the rec.params.completed has in it. So if this is true, set the task completed to true. If this is false, set it to false. That's going to help us so that we can undo a completed if we wanted to. So we're going to say update to do set completed. Does anyone see a problem with this statement?
Uh, you need you don't need to like specify it, right? Like wait.
I think you're on the right track. I just said update to do's set completed equal to true or false.
No, we don't want that because we don't want it to say true or false. We want it to say whether if it's completed or not, right?
No, we use a Boolean data type. Well, let's just
Don't
see
wait.
let's just
Wait,
see
don't
what
we need to
happens
be
here.
back on the ID though?
Uh-huh. If
Oh.
we ran this command, it would update every single one of my to-dos in the database to complete it because we did not specify the ID as part of the query. We got the ID to the backend, but the query issued to the database did not specify a where. In default, by default in SQL, if you do not specify a where, it will update the entire freaking table. Big mistake to make. So whenever you are writing your SQL queries, make sure you include your where the ID is equal to the rec.params.id.
Just a quick question. Why is the default that you can that you can update an entire column without having to specify it? Shouldn't it like be the other way around where it makes you double check like, hey, you should specify that you want to do that?
Because SQL was invented in the 70s and that was the behavior when it came out. And then they went, oops, well, we can't change that now. And so there are some databases that allow you to configure that and basically say block a query that doesn't have a where if you're doing an update or a delete from. Because yes, this is scary from an update perspective, but when you delete rows, same problem. If you don't specify a where, it will delete every single row in the table without specifying a where. Stupid, but that's the SQL way. So we're going to finish this out by still doing a select from our to-dos, still sending back all of the tasks. So make sure your patch only has one res.send. I'm grabbing my select from to-dos and sending everything back, just like we did for our insert command, just like we did for our select command. Three minutes to get over the finish line. I think we can do it. All we need to do is once we get our response back, we switch back to our front end. We grab our data from awaiting our response.json, and then we set our tasks to our data.to.tasks. We save, come over to Chrome. I check on an item, and it finally shows it as checked off. And just to get fancy, I'm going to throw some style on this LI. And I'm going to say the text decoration, if the task is completed, show line through. Otherwise, don't show anything. And now we can check and uncheck items and get them properly flowing. So backend, we added in our DB result and our res.send tasks. Front end, we got our data back on our on change, we set the tasks in, and then if you want to get fancy, you can throw this style in that will show the item as crossed out. Austin, my query without the where would have updated every item in the database to complete. Or, sorry, let me reword that. It would have set every item in the database to either complete or not complete based off of whether we were checking or unchecking. Okay, if this is all working for you, you should be able to check and uncheck to your heart's content. And now we are CRUing the database. We are creating items in the database by submitting them in the form. We are reading the items in the database and displaying them all in a list. And we are updating the items in the database by checking them off as completed or not completed. You can go on break. If your code is not working, that is okay. We will debug when you get back. Go on break, be back at 7:25, and we will go from there. Welcome back, everyone. All right. So we left off in our app doing our create, read, and update operations. We are going to learn about one more way to send data to the backend from our front end, even though the vast majority of the time we will use the request body and do the JSON work. There is a third type that we will use called a get parameter to go ahead and delete from the database. And then we will go through and comment out all of our code, number it out, see if you guys have any questions, and call it an evening. With all of that said, Terry, share your screen. Go for it.
Oh boy. Okay. This is what I'm getting right here.
Okay, so 404 not found. Let me see your backend code. And you are missing the colon in front of completed. So I knew that was the problem because it 404'd, but the URL was right over here. So the colon there tells it, hey, I'm not actually looking for the letters COMPLETED. What I'm looking for is the value of that getting passed in. So now if we uncheck, DB result is not defined. We need to borrow this down here. Checked and unchecked, and you're good to go. Of
Thanks.
course. Anyone else need help or was not able to get their code working before the break?
Me.
Yep, go for it.
I'm getting on my where is it? On my browser. It's saying there's something wrong with my on change, but I can't identify it.
Okay. So the first thing that I notice is we've got some errors in the terminal that are trying to help us out. So respond is assigned a value but never used. That should be response down here. So if we fix that there, that's one of them. Then it says new item text is not defined. Well, new item text,
In the use state.
is just called
Oh,
new
mixed-
item here.
mixed text.
So let's throw text in there, and believe it or not, that could have fixed everything. So check. Okay,
alright.
maybe not everything. Let's just try third, add, that works. We check it, and unexpected end of JSON. So let's come over here. Our patch is setting it to completed. We are getting the right data in. What we're not doing is sending back the data to the front end with the updated results. So refresh, uncheck, check, and we're good to go. Of
Thank you.
course. Anyone else need help? Okay. We are going to finish off our we're going to finish off our CRUD, D for delete operation, and then we will go through and kind of comment all of this code out. So last thing we are going to do is we are going to add a button that has a trash can. Use my emoji there, Control Command Shift to get my emoji picker up. I'm going to throw an on click on that sucker. That is going to get the event. We need to make it async because we are going to do a call to the database. I will say this time I don't even need to check the, yes, I do. I'm going to say const response equals await a fetch. Still to my localhost 3001. It will be to the tasks, and this time I'm going to say ID equals my task.id. Notice I did a question mark here. That is now a get parameter. That get parameter is what I can access in the backend just slightly differently. So we've seen data in the body, we've seen data in the route, and now we are seeing data as a get parameter. I am going to make my method on this delete. And then I'm also going to wrap this in a big if window dot confirm. Are you sure you want to delete this task? And that window.confirm is just a really nice, easy way to not have to build a yes or no modal. We don't have much control over the styling of it or how it gets displayed to the user, but it can be a quick and dirty way of making sure that the user has confirmed that they want to delete an item before they actually delete it. So I'm going to leave that up in my front end. I'm going to switch over to my back end. Try and leave as much of that on the screen as I can. In my back end, I'm going to do a server.delete to my tasks. That will be an async rec_reser. Going to res.send back the tasks, just like I have on every other one. I should note here that not every API will send back the list of all of the data when you do an update or delete or even insert operation. So if there are times that you're inserting into the database and then redirecting the user to another page that doesn't show that data, you don't need to necessarily send the data back every time. So that is and some APIs will say, well, if you want the data sent back, do a second request to get that data. So do like a follow-up get request for that. So I just want to note that there it isn't always database designed to send all the data back on all the operations. But because that's helpful for us here, because we control the API, because we're the ones building it, it makes sense that we can send it back. Okay, so for the delete one, we are going to say await our db.query. And this one is going to be a delete. So we are going to say delete from to-dos where the ID is equal to the rec.query ID. So params we access by putting them in the route up here. The body we access with rec.body, as long as we have the JSON parsing set up. And then the final way that we access information is with the rec.query.id, and that is going to access the query parameters, which are anything that come after this question mark over here. There are, of course, other ways of sending data to the server, like headers and a couple other methods as well. And there are formats we use other than JSON, but these are probably the three most common, or the three most common that I have seen and interact with. So we're going to do our delete query. We are going to select from to-dos. We're going to send all of that data back with the delete query. If I save, I should be able to click on delete on a task, hit the OK button, and not have it disappear. That is because I did not finish up with my response here. So I need to do the final data await response.json and set my tasks to my data.tasks. Delete, okay, it's disappeared, and I am finally finished with my to-do app. Give you guys a minute to catch up. Everything we've done on this one is either in this button or is in this server.delete. So these are the two chunks of new code that are highlighted on my screen. Read through them, make sure you understand them, try and get them working. And then we will go through and comment all of this. Unhighlight that to hopefully make it easier to read. Some people, when they are developing their applications, like to do their backend all at once. They like to create all of their tables. They like to get all the database stuff done. Then they move to their API, right? They like to build all the different endpoints for their NPI for their API, and then they like to go in and do all of the front end. I don't personally like to do that because I find that while I'm working on the front end, there may be additional fields that I need to add to the database. Or while I'm working on the back end, I may realize that a form that I'm submitting is going to update two separate tables, and I need to write that endpoint a little differently. So what I would advise for you guys is start going through and start going, all right, what data do I have to create, right? Let me get those tables created. You should be at a point by the end of the week where you can actually say, I'm going to set up my first API. I'm going to get Sequelize up and running, which we will cover tomorrow. Won't dive into that quite yet. So you're going to see how to get your tables created. We're going to learn about models and how we can use JavaScript to create our tables, and then also use JavaScript to update that data. So we're going to be doing that over in the chat application. We're going to see how we can interact with that way. Obviously, this is not easy code, but this is just about as complex as it gets. Still have to cover authentication. We still have to cover the object relational mapper. But other than that, from here, it just becomes easier ways to interact with our data, get it saved, all of that kind of stuff. So we are really close to unlocking the last of the things you need to learn to complete your capstones, believe it or not. Hopefully you're having light bulb moments. Terry, you need help? Go for it.
It's doing that thing again. I'm
You need an
Right.
S in tasks on your front end.
front end.
In that, yep, instead of task question mark. Oh, nope, that should be singular. The other task in that line should be plural.
Oh, I see
That
it.
one. You got it. Okay, let's take a look at your back end. And now it's got an error. Missing column. That's interesting. Column undefined does not exist. Eh? Do you... Can you drag that over? Beekeeper? What? All right, you've actually confused me. Congrats. ID name completed. Delete from to-dos where ID get the result. Missing column. All right, let's just try restart, refresh. Is it? So if we log out everything and delete before it hits the missing column, it is not getting access to the params because we're sending it in as the query. Now you're good to go. So it's params up here because we specified it as part of basically the URL or the route. But it is query down here because in our front end we did question mark, and anything that comes after the question mark is known as a query param. So we could have done that with a route parameter as well, but just in the spirit of showing you different ways of sending data to the server, we did it 3 separate ways.
Okay.
All right, anyone else need help or not have their delete working? Okay. Does anyone have questions about any specific part of the code before we comment out the workflow of adding a new item to the database? Kind of boring class, but kind of an exciting class in that we're seeing like things in the database, hopefully. Okay, so I gotta figure out, do we think 15 is the highest we got? 16, 17, 18? Bad guess. No 20, no 19. Okay, 18. Did we do a 19? No. Okay. So we left off at 18. Terry.
With like patch, I thought when we had Ryan when he was going over it, I thought like he said that patch rarely get used or people don't really use patch like that. So
It's a shame that they don't. So normally, the there isn't like a universal accepted use post for this or use patch for that, other than there is like general guidance on it. And so what there are three different methods, right? There's post, there's put, and there's patch. Post is only supposed to be used to insert something new into the database. However, because we can't do bodies on GET requests, oftentimes a post request will be used even though we're not inserting new data into the database. What a put is supposed to do is it is only supposed to update, and I always get these two messed up. The put is supposed to update only the fields that are passed in, and then patch is only supposed to, no, I'm sorry. Put is supposed to update the entire row in the database. Patch is meant to only update a specific column in the database. People don't always follow those rules though, right? So oftentimes you'll see a put used instead of a patch, and it doesn't really matter. I could have used a post there if I wanted to, as long as two things are true. As long as whatever method I'm using here lines up with whatever method I'm telling the API to use here, and that this isn't a duplicated URL. So obviously I can't have two post methods on the same exact URL. Those two will conflict. It won't know which one to use. So if you wanted to and use a put here instead, you could swap this patch out for a put, swap this method out for a put, and then you would be good to go, and it wouldn't make any difference. So you could really screw with people if you wanted to and say, oh, if you would like to add a new row to the database, use a server.delete. What? Well, it doesn't really matter what method we tell them to use. What really matters is what happens in the actual endpoint. Like, what is the code that's actually running? So API design wise, yes, there are differences between a patch and a put, but what really matters at the end of the day is what you're actually doing in the method itself. If that makes sense. And there's a there is an official like MDM documentation for it. So they say replaces all current representations of the target resource with the request payload compared to a patch which modifies partial modifications to the resource. So what they're trying to say here is if you do a put, you're supposed to update every column in the database compared to the patch, which is only updating one specific column that we're passing in. So that's why I did it as a patch, because we're only marking one thing as complete. We're only updating one value. That's why I did the patch instead of the put. But again, doesn't really matter as long as the back end code is lining up with the front end code and the endpoint is actually doing what you want it to in the database.
So if we need to change like multiple data, we would use put instead, or does it really like matter?
You would use put if you were like, oh, I want to be able to update the name of the task. I want to be able to update the checked value of it. And there's some other third piece of data that I want to change on it. Yeah, basically, and again, design wise, not absolutely the computer needs it, but design wise, a patch is going to update only the fields that you tell it to update compared to the put, which is expecting basically everything, the entire task object, to be sent in. So just think about it as, you know, if I'm putting something, I'm putting the entire thing there. If you were fixing my siding and you were like, oh, I gotta put the entire piece of siding there, or oh, I'm gonna patch just a little piece of the siding that's already there. So that's how I would kind of think about it, of like you're putting the whole thing or you're patching just a piece of it. Okay, everyone good? Any other questions? All right, let's comment this sucker out. At any point, feel free to raise your hand or come off mute and go, whoa, I don't understand that. We go through these numberings not for my sake, but yours, right? So if at any point you got questions, interrupt me. Let's talk through it. We left off at 18. Yep, we left off at 18. So using individual tasks in the database, show a new LI that uses the tasks for a key and the name column for the contents of the bullet. Okay, well, that was now all the way down here. We're using the task.name. So the computer is now done. It has gone out. It's made the API request. The API request has gone into the database. The database has sent it back into React. React has gone through all of the tasks. It has updated the map. It has shown everything out using the task.name, and React is done. And it's waiting for the user to do something. So what happens? The user now the user 19 enters a new task into the text box, which updates state. Then user submits form. So we go up to add new task, and that becomes 21. Function runs because form is submitted. 22, make a post request to the backend on to the backend tasks endpoint. Specify to the backend that the body is formatted as JSON. Convert a object that holds the inputted text from state into JSON. Now we pause here. We got to jump over to our post to tasks. So we say 25, this endpoint now runs because the front end made a request. 26, extract out the data from the body using the JSON parser we set up on Express. Now, this is a really easy step to miss and something that you guys want to make sure you're doing right. you cannot use that rec.body unless you do two things. On the front end, you have to tell it, hey, I'm sending in application JSON. If you don't do that, even though you may have formatted the data as JSON in the body, the Express server won't know how to read that data out. So we do need to say in the headers, actually, there are three things we need to do. Set the headers to application JSON in the content type on the front end. Number two on the front end is we have to stringify everything, right? We've got to take that data that we're sending in, convert it to a string. And then number three, up here, we have to tell the server, hey, JSON is getting sent in. Parse that out for us when the content type is set as application JSON so we can get access to the rec.body. So when you're setting up your APIs for the first time, it's really easy to go, oh, that data's in the body, rec.body, and realize that you've either forgotten to set the headers on the front end, you've forgotten to stringify it before you sent that body in, or three, you haven't told Express, heads up, JSON's going to get sent in, parse it out for us, and put it in rec.body. So those are the three steps you need to do whenever you're sending that data in. Now, that may seem like a hassle. You may go, well, I'll just use get params or URL params instead. That's fine until you start working with objects that have lots of arrays in them that are nested very like several levels deep. At that point, the body becomes a lot more beneficial and helpful for you guys. So you don't want to forget that step of express.json up here, the content type application JSON and the JSON.stringify. Once you get that set up, rec.body will just work for you, but you don't want to forget it. Okay, so 25, extract out the data when we set up Express. Then we are going to say generate a SQL insert command that drops in the new item text from the front end into the values. Number 27, run a SQL command to get all the to-dos in the database, now including the new item we inserted from number 26. Respond to the request with the new data, new to-dos. 28 jumps back to 29 over here. Parse out the JSON. Look at the tasks key in the response and set it into state. 31, clear out the input to text box. And then we come down to 32. Tasks were updated in state. Rerun this map to show the newly added item. I'm going to save you the details of, hey, we got to do the on change here, and we also would number out the delete here. But hopefully you guys see, all right, based off of the adding the new item, we're doing that same loop over and over again. The only difference is that we are hitting the patch endpoint or the delete endpoint. They're doing the same exact things, just slightly different SQL commands for them. And then the only other difference between them is how we access the data. In the delete endpoint, we use the query params. The query params are using the question mark at the end. Whatever the name is here before the equal has to line up right here. So we could call that query ID if we wanted to, and do the query ID right here. In fact, you know what? I am going to do that to make it more explicit. And then for the patch, instead of sending in as a body or sending it in as a question mark at the end, we set an in as a path param. So I could call that params ID, and then we would call it params ID right here. And that's how it knows to extract that out from here. Okay. Any questions on the flow? Any questions on the order that we did things? Does anyone have questions on the commented out stuff? Or does anyone have a question of how would I go about adding blah to this? Push this code to GitHub before I forget. Believe it or not, I think I'm going to let you out a full 30 minutes early. We will start on the chat application tomorrow, but no one wants to do project setup at 8 p.m. and have to go through all of those tedious little steps. So we will start there on Tuesday. We will also be using the chat application that we already used in React. So we'll be modifying the front end. We'll be just learning how to add in the database on top of that. And then we will do, I believe, the blog project after that with more practice on the database, setting all of that up, going from there. Oh, sorry, just saw the chat. Yes, I can definitely say after Joe and help you get that set up. Week 18, day 1 is now uploaded to GitHub. Okay, I will let you guys go a little early. We will be a lot more database fun to go from here. We'll be diving into SQLize tomorrow. So have an awesome evening, everyone, and I will see you tomorrow.